with me, or is Adrian safe?
You'll be fine.
Okay, good. How you doing?
See you, Senator.
Good to see you. How's life? I appreciate folks coming out and having a little conversation with me. And what I'm going to do is really open it up for questions and comments or suggestions, whatever may be on your mind. But I'm going to go over a little bit of my background and history, who I am, go into some of the issues that we have here in Michigan, and then the vision on how we should solve these issues. And so, name's Aric Nesbitt. As some of you know, it is Aric with an A. It's not a misspelling. Middle of 5 kids, all started with A's, and by the time, come on in.
I'm waiting for my husband.
Okay, he's allowed in here too.
Oh, he is. I just
Yeah.
Hi, honey.
How you doing?
All there. Beautiful day, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. All there. That looks good. That looks
good.
Grab a sandwich and some water and anything else. But grew up in Southwest Michigan, a little town called Lawton, which is between Kalamazoo and St. Joe, south of Pawpaw. They used to have a Girl Scout camp. Actually, a classmate of mine, what was it called? A classmate of mine actually bought it a few years ago. Yeah, that's in the township I lived in.
Mosquitoes.
Yes. And so growing up on a farm, you learn a little bit about hard work, family, our traditional values, learning what's right and wrong, what a full day's work actually means, that you're not done until work's actually done. And graduated from the same public school that my brothers and dad and grandfather graduated from, for the census community. Going to church on Sundays, we went to one of those small country churches where you learn the value, you understand what right and wrong is about, and in a family, middle of 5 kids, you understand pretty quickly if you pick on somebody else what the strength of being wrong is at times. But come on in. So all dressed up, so it's good. Thank you.
Hi, Aric.
Good to see you.
Pleased to meet you.
Yeah, absolutely. What's your name?
Oh, my name is Matt Whitty.
Nice to meet you, Matt. So,
This is my wife, Vivian.
Vivian, nice to meet you. Where do you guys live?
Tecumseh.
Tecumseh. Well, thanks for coming on down. So, the lessons you learn from, I think, growing up on a farm, hard work, traditional values, patriotism, right and wrong, can take you through life pretty well. And I ended up going to Hillsdale College, did an economics degree there, and those common sense areas you learn back growing up, you understand what the philosophical foundations are of our country, our nations, the family unit. And I ended up doing a degree in economics there, and I always said I was on my dad's scholarship, which meant he would have mom drop me off at school. I'd have to figure out a way to pay for it, and then somebody else would have to drop me back off at home. But been married for about 9 years now. I have 3 beautiful kids, a 6-year-old, a 3-year-old, and now a 7-week-old. God bless my wife. But, so we're trying to do what we can. And she was, Margot Louise was born about 2 weeks early. It was 9 pounds, 14 ounces.
Wow.
So that's a big baby. But you also understand a family that's been here for nearly 200 years, like our family has, what kind of state are we going to leave to the next generation? And if we do nothing, if we just keep the status quo going the way it is here in Michigan, over the next 30 years, we're going to lose up to 700,000 people as a state. 3 out of 4 4th graders aren't able to read at grade level. They continue to borrow money at the state level. Only state in the nation to increase its income tax last year. And so the question is over the next 30 years, do we become a poorer state with less people, less prosperity, or do we become a more innovative state, more dynamic state, with a growing population that people actually want to work, invest, and get an education? This last year, we've had the fastest growing unemployment rate in the nation, and yet you talk to the owner here, she can't find workers. I think part of that's a government problem that's saying, we're going to subsidize you to stay at home.
Definitely.
Saw that with the COVID lockdowns, right? You're critical, but you're not critical. What does that do to somebody's work behavior? Mental health, education, the shutdowns, the locking the school's doors. What did that do? Average students 3/4 of a grade level behind, just because of those lockdowns. And so as I look at what's needed here in Michigan, in terms of the policies that need to be implemented to make Michigan a more prosperous state, to move us from a bottom 10 state in education, bottom 10 state in employment opportunities and economic development, is that there's a few things. One is that we actually need to get back to an efficient, effective government, just back to basics. Day one, I would say, Doge state government. On a regulation level, making sure that it's efficient, effective, and scrap what's likely hundreds, if not thousands, of rules and regulations that are out there. You have to have the executive that drives that with department heads that understand that's the mission on regulations and on spending. Then you gotta also, right now I figure only 20% of state workers are actually coming to the office right now. We can't get the real numbers. The legislature can't. And so on day one, they all have to return to the office. I know President Trump's working to root out DEI and all the woke policies in our schools and elsewhere, but that's something where, in the state level, we have to be active to make sure that DEI and the woke policies are actually rooted out to get back to basics. On education, Mississippi, it's good to have a federalist system, right? You can compare other states, what they do, what they didn't do. Mississippi, 10 years ago, was 49th in reading scores. Today, they're 24th, fastest growing state in the nation in reading scores. They're spending a fraction. Come on in.
Thank you.
How are you?
Good, good.
Where are you guys out of?
Waldron.
Wonderful. So,
Well,
that's good. I'm Eric.
Lou Thompson.
Good to see you.
Good to meet you.
I'm Dorothy.
Dorothy, nice
Yeah.
to see you. So, go ahead and grab
We
a seat.
apologize
Oh, no.
for our lateness.
You're right on time.
All right.
Yeah, we're just gotten into a little, solving some problems in this world.
All right, sounds good.
Conservative solutions, that's
All right.
So in education, they did a few things. One, just back to basics, phonics, science of reading. Making sure if you're not reading at third grade level, that you have some scholarships for reading coaches, and that there's a retention policy. And I think it's just, a lot of it is just what's that common sense and back to basics. Later on in education, you guys know who Mike Rowe is? Dirty Jobs. He spoke at the Mackinac Center a few weeks ago in Dearborn at their annual banquet, and he gave a very startling statistic, 5 and 2. For every 5 tradespeople that are retiring, there's only 2 that are replacing them. And right now, in high school, there's a one-size-fits-all mandate. The kids have to do a certain curriculum that's all college-bound. My oldest brother, he spent his junior year at a vocational education center on diesel mechanics. His senior year, he did work co-op 3 days a week, made some money, and on day one, he had a job when he graduated from high school. I think we just need to get back to basics and saying that full day's work means something, and family supporting jobs and the trades. If that's your passion, allow that passion to happen. And I think we need to figure that out earlier in high school. Any economy that's going to develop, that's going to grow, means that we're energy abundant and not energy constrained. I think nobody knows that better than Kevin here. But you look at, it's 7 years later, you've heard of Line 5? helps support about 400,000 households propane, helps support the Toledo refinery down the street, making sure that jets take off with fuel out of Detroit Metro. 7 years ago, it was passed in the legislature that they would create a tunnel in bedrock instead of on the bottomlands where it's currently at for oil and gas. $500 million energy and environmental investment that 7 years later, this governor, attorney general, the former administration tried to block and prevent happening. You're talking 800 by union trade jobs, you're talking energy security for the next generation, and they continue to block that. And unfortunately, President Trump's administration just recently is fast-tracking the last permits at the federal level. That's one thing. Two is about a year and a half ago, the Democrats in a full partisan vote voted on what I term the Green New Scam. They had one seat majority in the House and Senate, the governorship. And probably the most visible thing you guys see is these industrialization of farm and forest lands around the state. And we figure that it's going to be 300,000 acres of farm and forest land that will be industrialized into solar arrays across the state if we don't repeal that. Now farmers, it's hard for them to say no when they're being offered 3, 4, 5, 10 times what the rent they would get from a neighboring farmer. Where's that money coming from? From the Biden administration's Inflation Explosion Act that they can, continue to double down on. And so my hope is that we see a little drop, drying up of that with the big beautiful bill that's going through Congress right now. But we need to repeal the Green New Scam in the first month when I'm governor, when we have a Republican House and a Republican Senate. Bring back some local control, but more importantly, stop the mandate that says over the next 15 years they want to ban any kind of fossil fuels being used as fuel here in the state of Michigan. The economy. As I say, back to basics. How do you compete and win in the 21st century? Predictable permitting, predictable licensures, lower taxes, lower energy costs, good transportation, good education, right? It's not what we've seen over the last 5 years where there's been nearly $5 billion spent on corporate welfare. As increased costs have continued to go up. It's so, as I would say, is instead of using all this corporate welfare we've seen, I think how are you? Seeing if anybody wants anything?
Yeah, that's what I was trying to do. I just said, I don't want to go in there. He's talking.
Yeah. Anybody want anything? I think we have plenty, so.
That's what I thought.
Really
Thank you. I
appreciate it.
apologize.
Yeah, thank you. No worries. So as I look at it, that how do you work to make sure you, instead of what I've considered the last few years when they repealed right to work, has higher energy costs onto folks, increased permitting and regulations here in the state of Michigan. And then I say they round up this economic garden. And now they're paying these corporations billions of dollars to try to transplant here. That's not how you grow the economy. That's not how it happens. And so when I say scrap this corporate welfare, go ahead, use that investment. What the House Republicans just passed was use that investment in terms of for roads and bridges, and make sure that 100% of the money you pay at the pump actually goes to roads and bridges to fix our infrastructure. Because the last 5 years, this governor's put a bunch of money on the credit card, $3.5 billion to fix some of these M roads and I roads, and it's going to cost $6.5 billion to pay that credit card bill back, which means less money for our local roads, less money for our county roads. End of the day, if you're going to compete and win, how do you go ahead and make sure that we're making government more efficient and effective, lowering the cost of state government? And one of the first things we need to finish off doing Started about 15 years ago with Governor Snyder and the Republican legislature, was paying off our long-term liabilities, our debt. We had $80 billion in 2010, there's about $35 billion left. If we pay that off over the next 10 years, which continue making these payments, will free up over $3 billion a year. That's how much the state assesses on property taxes. So there's consequences on who you elect, the policies that they enact, and whether or not Michigan's a dynamic, growing state. And when you have a border community like this, you see it between Ohio and Michigan. You see it between, down the road between Niles and Elkhart. And so if you continue to put up barriers to businesses to invest and grow, they're going to go elsewhere. Capital follows the path of least resistance. When they put up resistors like they've been doing the last few years with this socialist utopia thinking, that capital is going to go elsewhere. So I just appreciate you guys coming out. I'd like to open it up for some comments, suggestions, questions.
First question that comes to my mind, well, first of all, I'm sure you'll win everybody in this room's vote. We all certainly think just like you do. But, when it comes to the bigger picture, Trump is doing great things to, you might say, save the auto industry, but, the auto industry was formed in Michigan, and of course it's diversified all over the globe now. Do you have a plan, or do you have connections to bring a lot of it back? You drive around any of the rural counties in Michigan, you see a bunch of old abandoned factories that have been closed 30, 40, 50 years. They were vertically integrated, used to build everything, now everything's outsourced. But even a plan to bring back the small suppliers that have to support, manufacturing. And we'd love to have some assembly plants back here in Michigan, but whatever portion of it we can get here would be great.
Yeah.
Can you give some thought?
Yeah, so as I look at rolling out agendas, we rolled out and you guys' agenda for rural Michigan is kind of a starter of a set of agendas I'm going to be rolling out on education and infrastructure and other things, but on manufacturing specifically. And I'd say, I kind of addressed it a little bit on how do you compete. And as I look at it, one, with what President Trump's doing nationally to try to bring back manufacturing, allow investments around the world to come in, I'm afraid Michigan's not in the top 30 states that they're going to be looking at. You look at our cost of energy, you look at our cost of taxes, you look at our infrastructure, you look at our labor laws. We're not a right-to-work state. We were for 10 years, repealed it 2 years ago, and that's one of those that's one of those check marks that government developers look at. And then permitting. Eagle is out of control.
Yes.
They are out of control. I hear it 3-4 times a day on folks that want to invest and grow here in Michigan and they can't get a permit. You go up to Muskegon, you talk about old foundries, you talk about old manufacturing that's there. There's still a solid group of manufacturing, but the stuff around Lake Muskegon and closed down, there's folks that are ready to build apartments and condos and marinas. And I was talking to a guy a few weeks ago when I was up in Muskegon, ready to put $300 million into development along the lakeshore. Eagle's shaking them down, won't give him any of the permits that he needs. This isn't some check to a Chinese Communist Party corporation, like we see us all with Goshen up in the Big Rapids, right? This is a Michigan person trying to invest here, and he can't.
Yeah.
I hear it in Macomb County, actually from a Democrat, political leader out of Macomb. They're trying to do some investments and allow some companies to invest, and they can't get responses from Eagle. I hear it from a manufacturer in Holland. They build boats, so they have a dock on Lake Makatawa, and they're trying to expand that dock to a floating one instead of a stationary dock. 3.5 years in, still don't have a permit from Eagle. This is a manufacturer with 700 jobs here. 95% of what they produce goes outside the state. They need this for their dealer network and for customers to come in. They wanted to do a floating dock so that they're not stepping down and stepping up. $1.3 million in on legal costs and engineering costs for a freaking dock. And so, as I look at it, and then as we all should look at it, is that how do you just get back to common sense basics to compete, right? Good schools, good roads, lower cost and more efficient government. How do you get to, Indiana's the lowest per capita costs in the Midwest in terms of their government. How do you get closer to them and farther away from Illinois? Pay down our long-term liabilities, that's how you work on a flourishing economy. It's not these, what you've seen out of either Granholm or Whitmer, is these flashy deals where they have to write hundreds of millions of dollars of checks. And I've been in the legislature for a bit, and I have one of the best scores on corporate welfare and business subsidies out there. Mackinac Center does a ranking, and whether I've been in the majority or the minority or leadership or a backbencher, I've been one that just philosophically believes that you just have to get back to the basics.
Thank you.
I just want to say I would love it if somebody would also work with the local governments to straighten them out, because a lot of these local governments that we elect end up in line with whoever the tower is before them, which is usually the state. Like, they couldn't quit using the voting machines because they were afraid not only that they'd lose money from Michigan, but they also weren't in line with the people above them. So a lot of these people, they want to change things, they become commissioners and things like that. Excuse me, Kevin. But it's true. They end up having to go in line, or they're not going to step up the ladder the way they want to.
Yeah.
And believe me, they also are finding ways to inhibit things getting better with the people that own property. I mean, you may put up a lean-to, which is only a partial roof and 4 sticks, and they charge you $150 to put it up, and then they charge you a couple $100 more in your taxes. I mean, there's so many things with the local governments, and then you can have all the meetings you want, not to put in another gravel pit, or you don't want the something put out in front of your house because it should be on the other side of the road with the railroad, like the bike path. But they do it anyway. They listen to you supposedly, but they do what they want anyway. And somebody needs to straighten out these local governments, because they're charging too much for things. They're acting like they are the supreme beings when all they are people that are supposed to listen to the people, and they're not doing it.
I think this is the importance of being involved, like you guys are.
We have been for 3 years.
And then two, what's the role of government? Just in general. And it's a reminder at times of just taking a step back of what is the role of government to protect individual rights, individual spheres, of freedoms, free market economy, private property rights, our First and Second, amendments. I mean, this is, what's the thought process in terms of what's that role of government? Enforcement of contracts, right? And I think that's sometimes we get out and saying government does so much stuff, and you saw it 5 years ago with COVID, is that they thought, they could, all that government control, when at the end of the day, just bring it back to the people, right?
Exactly.
And that's why, during COVID, I read the Federalist Papers quite a few times as a reminder of saying, government's only there because the citizens allow it
Thank you.
to be there.
So I think we can all agree that some of the things that will most hardest hit with the new administration in Michigan and the COVID issue is Michigan's small businesses. It's almost like there's a concerted effort to break them so that they're closing. What do you see as a good solution to help encourage new business and allow them to thrive?
Yeah. I mean, this is a real challenge. As I mentioned earlier, how to just, on the government's role, how to just get back to basics, allowing individuals, allowing people, allowing entrepreneurs not to have to jump through all the red tape, right? Permitting, education. I mean, you look at new housing, everybody says we have a housing shortage, and this is, in our state, stagnant in growth. The if not declining, right? And the average house, new house, has $95,000 in regulations that are built into it. 15 years ago, you could buy a house in town for probably the same price. And that's a lot of it driven by building codes, by local, by state. And so how do you get back basics of saying, okay, let's allow entrepreneurs to actually invest and grow. You see it here on the restaurant business. Let's just take, we're in a restaurant, hospitality. They were closed for the longest period of time, right? And then workers 5 years ago were getting paid more to stay at home than go to work. And then you had so many of these daycare centers that were closed down, these neighborhood small daycare centers that were closed down. Those never reopened. Those were some of the lowest cost ones that were available. They're not reopening because of the regulation side, certification side. And then this, as you look at it, it's what is the cost of doing business? In the last 5 years, the inflation that's taken a huge bite out of not just our wallets, but business owners' wallets across the nation. There's consequences to that. And so everybody's, seems to be fine with some of this spending that's going on over the last, several years. But the result has been, means people are poorer and less successful. And that's the importance of what they're trying to do, is a reset at the federal level of saying, instead of this government endorsed growth, all this government finance growth, that we get back to private sector investment and growth. How do you take out those barriers of folks to invest? And that's through regulations, that's through taxes, that's through permitting, that's through licensures. Simple things like, if you're licensed in another state as a nurse or a plumber or contractor, it should be pretty easy to get licensed in Michigan instead of having to start all over again.
Right.
That's a barrier to entry, right?
Absolutely.
And so it's the same thing with here on how do you try to engage the private sector to grow instead of just continuing to say no.
Well, I think to add on to that the business tax is pretty stiff. So is there any leeway on that we could kind of lighten that load for them? Because obviously, when you have a public that their money isn't going as far, they don't have as much to spend out.
Yeah, I mean, and that's always comes back to what is the role and purpose of government, and how do you downsize that size so that you can lower taxes all the way through. At the end of the day, companies and businesses, it's a pass-through. They either have to pass it through or they can't, which means they get a loss, which means they close, right? You either have those opportunities or you don't. You're absolutely right.
Just, if you want to foster growth, the best way, the simplest way is just get the government out of the way and let the ambition and intelligence of the people foster forth, rather than putting in, bureaucracy puts endless roadblocks up. And if you just take away that bureaucracy, the ambition and intelligence and the hard work of the people will build the economy the way it always has.
That's the beauty of the American system.
Yes, it
supposed
is.
to be the beauty.
I think of Henry Ford building the Rouge back in 1920. They didn't have permits. You just went ahead and built it.
Well, and this is the long-term challenge as a nation. And as a state, we can compare to other states. What do they do that's better than what we're doing? And you look at the no-income tax states like Texas, Tennessee, Florida, growth, flourishing, right?
Yeah.
You look at the low overall tax burden states like Indiana, you see that, again, they have an income tax, flourishing. You have low regulatory states, and I consider Utah and Idaho as kind of having the lowest kind of regulatory burden. Their growth and flourishing are usually higher. So there's examples that are out there. And how do you go ahead and implement them here in Michigan? And that's what, with the new Republican majority in the House, that's what we're driving on the policy positions on education, on transportation, on permitting, and trying to have those all set up when we went back to the governor's office, the House, the Senate next year, that it's not like 2017 when Trump first came in and Congress didn't react. We have a plan, and that's what we're building off of.
May I just say, as the people in the room, that we're all Republicans and we want to talk about money. So, how do you compare with, let's say, John James, who this week it came out, he's got a boatload of money behind him, and he's got, evidently Ronna Romney is going to run his campaign. Well, I'm not a fan of Ronna's, but she's got a boatload of experience. How do you compare? What have you got? You got money? Let's talk about it.
Yeah. So very importantly is that, yes, you have some candidates that have run a few times statewide. Some have lost statewide a few times, that are in the primary. There may be a few others that get into the primary. But at the end of the day, I always figure there's three things that you need for a successful campaign. You got to have a good candidate that I think that needs to have a relatable background, that works hard, that can engage folks across the state. Two, you got to have a good message of what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. And three, you got to have the resources to be able to spend the money that's needed to connect with folks. The first week we got announced, we raised $1 million. We continue to hit the goals that I feel we need to meet for this year to be able to have the money and the resources for next year. I'm engaging the grassroots around the state. The feedback has been positive from the grassroots. And as you look at anybody in the last 20 years that starts off with the highest name ID in a primary, they're not usually the one that comes out of it. Blanchard has a lot higher one 20 years ago, and it was Randall. Nobody knew who Snyder was in 09. And it was, and a lot of people knew who Cox and Hoekstra were. Trump was at what, 3% when he first announced in May of 2000, June of 2015. And so I have 23 fundraisers or meet and greets over the next 2 months in our first filing. And I feel pretty positive we're going to have the resources to be able to get our message out. And I feel pretty positive of the folks coming back. I have a far more work ethic where I'm going to work my tail off and engage folks around the state. So at the end of the day, it's about having enough resources to be able to get your message out and being able to have the right message to get out instead of just all the resources in the world. So I've been pretty happy where we're at. But you're right, how do you win it, right?
I guess the people on our roof I got to check on. So.
Hopefully they're still up there.
Thanks a lot.
Hi, so I know earlier you voiced obviously the opposition to the Green New Deal policies, but considering how, if we look back in history, FDR's investment in infrastructure plans helped to transform the U.S. economy at a very pivotal moment, do you see a role for public investment in renewable energy and technologies such as vertical farming that expand food access while conserving land?
So there's a lot to unpack there, but I'll try to simplify it. That I'm somebody who believes more in the free market than government intervention. It's just the basics of my belief system. I'm one that believes that if you engage folks and allow folks to flourish and entrepreneurs to flourish, that profit motivation is what convinces folks to innovate and grow. I mean, you look at Henry Ford, you look at Dow, you look at any number of folks that have innovated their way. And you continue to see that innovation around America because the government allows folks to invest and grow. So
Well, given that after FDR's policies were put into place with the original New Deal, we saw such economic growth that led to the 1950s, a time period often idolized as the golden era of the American economy. How would we be able to maybe reconcile that to balance a version of that in a modern sense that allows for free market principles so that the individual can still do these things?
I think your lessons in it, I disagree with your lessons in economics. I guess that's my first point. Well, first part, in terms of post-World War II with the transition from the war economy to a market economy, a lot of troops coming back, a lot of new labor coming back, is what you saw was a growth and a period of growth that was from expanded trade, lower taxes, peacetime, and lower regulations, along with better infrastructure and transportation. There is a role for government, and I've said that. But the role of government is how do you go ahead and make sure you have good roads, good schools, easier permitting, and I mean, heck, try to go ahead and build the interstate system today with the permitting and
yeah, that's why I'm asking about based on how we've historically done it. And you mentioned the tax rates. Well, yes, the income taxes in the 1950s were much lower, but corporate tax rates over a certain dollar amount were higher. That's where we got markets like Black Friday. Most companies actually operated in the red until that day, because they were actually taking the funds from their profits and investing in their businesses. It allowed for growth, including growth for organizations like McDonald's, where they were able to franchise and things of that nature. So it's really more or less, my question is about, do you feel like there's a way that we could balance this new technology to help preserve our environment in terms of the renewables, while still maintaining that economic growth we've also had since the 80s, when we started to really have the new age economy?
So overall, on generating from energy, that I've always looked at having what's the lowest cost, what's reliable, and also what makes sure that we have a diversity when stuff is off that's available. And so I'm somebody that, whether it's nuclear, whether it's coal, whether it's natural gas, whether it's other renewables, look at it through the lens of reliability and affordability. And you see that those forces can make that happen. You don't have to do it by subsidies, by mandates. You can do that through other forces on that. And that's the beauty of the American innovation, is that by allowing that profit motivation that's there, folks are willing to take risks that other people aren't willing to take. And that's just my philosophy, is that that's part of how do you have a competitive economy to grow and compete. Us buying...
No, I don't mean to interrupt. You get to me when you finish.
Yeah. So that's my basic philosophy.
That's all I was trying to figure out, just seeing if we can, is there a way that you see balancing these new things to preserve our environment for future generations and our country for future generations, not just the...
Yeah, this is the beauty of America, productivity and wealth and is that over the last 45 years, the American economy has grown by over 200%. Our population has grown by over 50%. Our miles driven have grown by over 100%. Our use of energy has only grown by 12%. Our carbon emissions have only grown by about 0%. And the six main pollutants that the EPA tracks, SOx, NOx, particulate matter, has actually decreased by 77%.
Wow.
So we're a more productive, wealthier, larger country that has a cleaner environment than we did 45 years ago, because of innovation, and in large part because of innovation into natural gas development, hydraulic fracturing. We've went from just look at natural gas. 20 years ago, it was 3 times to 7 times, well, 7 times more than it is today. Nothing else has come down in price like that because of American innovation and technology, and that's led to a cleaner environment.
Do you think that perhaps that the cleaner environment would also be a result of the EPA, which was an organization established by Theodore Roosevelt to help protect our environment and national parks?
EPA was developed by President.
Well, you're right. You're right. The former of EPA became EPA. Yes.
At the end of the day, you can regulate all you want, but if you don't have a productive, innovative, growing economy, you're stifling it. And so it's about those kind of innovations. We've seen that the American economy can be very resilient. And that's, and you look at it over time, with more productivity, more innovation, you get to a cleaner environment because we care about it.
Well, yes, absolutely. Now, I do have just one last question based on something in Michigan. We did have a program of the film incentives that were cut, that were actually poised to bring jobs in. Do you think, given the state of Georgia and New Mexico now, that perhaps Michigan missed an opportunity when we cut those, because that would have potentially brought in more jobs?
We spent over $800 million on those Hollywood film subsidies.
Yes.
And there's less film jobs at the end of those subsidies than at the beginning of those subsidies.
Okay.
And so if we're going to compete and win, we just got to get back to basics instead of doing this beggar thy neighbor type of stuff. We can't be all things to all people. I love folks that are creative, that want to do art or want to do film. Awesome. But that doesn't mean Michigan taxpayers should subsidize Hollywood.
Thank you, Senator. You wonder if our new reporter thinks he's walked into a debate rather than a campaign presentation where he gets to ask us people-like questions. As you know, you and I first met a number of years ago when you chaired the House Energy Committee, and I testified there a number of times. I've always appreciated your commitment to conservative principles. One of the things that I shared then is that Michigan's solar and wind resources are not competitive with sunnier and windier states, which means we're paying 2 to 3 times the price for wind and solar here that you might pay for solar in Arizona or wind in Iowa, which means we have a long-term competitive disadvantage. Now we have this specter of the preemption of local siting of wind and solar approved. I was there when it passed.
One brave Democrat would have stopped the whole thing.
Absolutely. And Reggie Miller, who represents Macon Township, assured me and Chairman Van Doren she was a hard no, and in fact was the second yes vote on that legislation.
She needs to know.
So we have the Republicans united in Michigan in a way I've never seen on the question of renewables. We've seen Farm Bureau finally get off the bench, speak out on renewables and the harm coming to the ag community. And we have the House Republican Caucus having entered an amicus brief on the behalf of our legal appeal of the MPSC order that far exceeds their regulatory authority under PA 233. Right now, the Republicans are committed to a repeal of PA 233. But my experience has seen that when the Republicans are in charge, energy policy is largely dictated by the utilities, and under the Democrats, largely dictated by the renewable energy interests and environmental groups like MEC and Sierra Club. If we have the trifecta and you are a governor, and this is not a hostile question, but you know where I'm going, how confident can we be that the Republicans will be able to resist what in the past has been a very strong force in the utility monopolies?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's something where you see it on, I think at both sides more traditionally, 12 years ago or 15 years ago. My basic philosophy on energy, I know in the 16 energy bill, which we got to know each other pretty well, my main driving point on that was try to take away those RPS mandates and the energy optimization mandates and try to allow this IRP process. Now, integrated resource plan, that means you put it all in the same basket, whether it's transmission, generation, what kind, and you do a 5-year plan, 5-year rolling plan on it. And the challenge I saw with looking back at the 2016 bill was that I didn't see that all 3 of the commissioners would be pretty left-wing folks that could care less of what's actually in statute.
In the
and
case
law.
of Director Scripps, comes right out of the renewable energy industry to then head
And
our
who knows what
public
his
service.
holdings still are and everything else. And so my 2 cents is that how do you actually do what's right for the consumer? And I know we can disagree sometimes on, regulated markets or retail open access markets. The biggest driver of costs for electricity energy markets is the generating source and the base load usage. In 2007, I think we can agree on this, in 2007, 2 things came together with Grand Home's energy plan. You're right that there was Republicans that were really the ones pushing some of the RPSs to begin with, is that at that time, there was a drop of 20% base load. What happened in 07, 08, 9, 10 in Michigan? All of these plants got closed, right? We lose 20% of our base load. At the same time, there was a mandate for a 10% renewable energy mandate, and they entered into contracts at that time that were even the wholesale contracts. So that's what you purchase at the wholesale level, were more than even the retail price after the transmission and distribution costs. So we pay, I think I pay what, 16 cents a kilowatt hour, for energy all in. Usually the wholesale price of generating is 7 to 8, 5 to 8%, depending on cents. They were entering into what, 30 cents per kilowatt? Mm-hmm. And so I think where we can see the agreement and where we'll likely with a Republican majority, House, Senate, is that one is the bill that was passed a year and a half ago will be completely repealed if you have that. Now we're back to the 16 energy bill. What does that look like to improve that? And I think that's going to take some, some work and challenges on where we get to on that.
I guess my point specifically was local control of siting. And I think Republicans will be able to hold it up against pressure from the utilities to leave some of the state preemption in effect.
I don't think so. I think the state will, I think it'll be a full repeal of the bill.
Good. You got my support.
Isn't that your gut, Jake? Yeah. I mean, I think the House and Senate, just the response, I think, and you see this on some issues where there's always that wayward Republican, but I feel pretty solid on this one.
I'm very pleased with their position, that's for sure.